In the humid dawn of March 3, 1943, on the bridge of the Japanese destroyer Arashio, Captain Commander Hideo Kabuki scanned the Bismarck Sea, a veil of morning mist clinging to the horizon. Below, exhausted sailors wrestled oil-soaked survivors from the waves. Men from the transport ship Maru, sunk just the day before. This vital convoy, Operation 81, carrying desperately needed reinforcements to La, New Guinea, had already suffered losses to American B-17s. Yet, Kabuki and his fellow captains held on to a fragile hope. The worst was behind them. Their destination was mere hours away. Fighter cover from La, they believed, would shield them through these final, perilous miles. Then, at approximately 10 a.m., a lookout's voice sliced through the air, uttering a single word that would seal the fate of thousands. Aircraft. What Kabuki saw approaching from the southwest was unlike anything he had witnessed in years of naval warfare. These were not the high-altitude B-17s, dropping bombs from 5,000 feet, where anti-aircraft guns stood a fighting chance. These were B-25 Mitchell bombers and Australian Beaufighters, screaming in so low their propellers churned the sea spray. They flew at water level, fast and direct, in a coordinated assault poised to revolutionize naval combat in the Pacific. In mere seconds, the time it took for a skip bomb, armed with its 5-second delay fuse, to bounce across the water, Captain Kabuki's world would erupt into chaos. His ship would be crippled, its steering destroyed, sending the Arashio careening into the transport ship Nojima Maru in an uncontrolled, fatal collision. Within 15 minutes, the entire convoy would be decimated. 7 transport ships, carrying 6,900 troops, would be burning or sinking. 4 of 8 destroyer escorts would be destroyed or fatally damaged. This was no mere convoy attack. This was the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The moment skip bombing proved that surface ships could no longer operate safely within range of land-based aircraft. The desperate gamble. 2 months earlier, in January 1943, Lieutenant General Hatazō Adachi, commanding the 8th Area Army at Rabaul, New Britain, faced a desperate situation. Allied forces had captured Buna on the New Guinea coast and now threatened the critical Japanese bases at La and Salamaua. These bases were the linchpin of Japan's defensive strategy in the Southwest Pacific, guarding the approaches to Rabaul, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, where nearly 100,000 Japanese troops were stationed. Losing La would open a clear path for the Allies, threatening the Philippines and even Japan's home islands. The logistics of war in this theater were brutal. Every soldier, every bullet, every grain of rice had to travel by ship from Rabaul across the treacherous Solomon and Bismarck Seas. The distance was only 500 miles, but it might as well have been 5,000 given the growing might of Allied air power operating from Port Moresby and Milne Bay. Previous convoy attempts had met with mixed success, often at prohibitive cost. Imamori knew he needed to reinforce La with a full division. After heated discussions, Operation 81 was conceived, a massive effort to deliver 6,900 fresh troops of the 51st Division directly to La. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, warned that losses could exceed 50%. Yet, the alternative, a grueling march through hostile jungle, promised even greater casualties from disease, starvation, and air attacks. The decision was made. The convoy would sail. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, a 54-year-old veteran of countless night battles in the Solomons, was chosen to lead. His force comprised 8 of the Imperial Navy's finest destroyers, all battle-hardened veterans of Guadalcanal. But this operation was different from the lightning-fast Tokyo Express runs Kimura had perfected. His sleek destroyers now had to shepherd 8 slow, vulnerable transport ships, loaded with soldiers and supplies. The convoy's maximum speed would be an agonizing 7 knots, barely faster than a jog. For Kimura, accustomed to slashing through enemy waters at 30 knots, this snail's pace must have felt like sailing with an anchor deployed. Every hour at sea increased the chance of detection. Every mile in daylight invited air attack. The birth of a revolution. Meanwhile, 500 miles away in Port Moresby, Lieutenant General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, grappled with a persistent problem: how to sink ships from the air. Traditional high-level bombing had proven almost useless against moving vessels. In a January convoy battle, 416 sorties had sunk just 2 ships. Kenney knew that without a decisive way to interdict Japanese convoys, MacArthur's New Guinea offensive would descend into a bloody stalemate. Kenney was no traditionalist. In 1928, he had theorized about skip bombing, dropping bombs from very low altitude to skip across the water and explode against a ship's hull. Dismissed as too dangerous, too impractical then, it was now time to turn theory into reality. Major William Benn, commanding the 63rd Bombardment Squadron, became Kenney's primary test pilot. Through trial and error, they discovered the ideal approach: 200 to 250 feet altitude, 200 to 250 miles per hour, releasing the bomb 300 to 600 yards from the target with a 4 to 5 second delay fuse. The margin for error was non-existent. But skip bombing alone wasn't enough. The bombers needed to suppress the intense anti-aircraft fire they would face during their low-level approaches. This is where Major Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn, a former Navy pilot and Kenney's secret weapon for unconventional solutions, entered the story. Gunn, whose family was interned by the Japanese in Manila, possessed a burning desire for revenge and mechanical genius. He transformed a standard B-25 Mitchell bomber into a flying gunship, stripping out the bombardier's compartment and replacing it with 4 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns. He then added 2 more on each side and another 4 underneath, creating a devastating surge of forward firepower. Kenney immediately recognized its potential. "Pull everything out of the nose and fill it full of 50 caliber guns," he told Gunn. "Give me all the forward firepower possible. I want a skip bomber that can overwhelm the deck defenses of a Japanese destroyer." Throughout February 1943, these modified B-25s practiced relentlessly against the wreck of the SS Pruth off Port Moresby. Day after day, they roared in at mast height, guns blazing, bombs skipping into the rusted hulk. The accuracy was remarkable. The Australian contribution was also crucial. Number 30 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force, RAF, flying Bristol Beaufighters, had developed its own low-level attack techniques. Group Captain Bill Gehring proposed a coordinated plan. Beaufighters would go in first at mast height, suppressing anti-aircraft positions, immediately followed by the skip-bombing B-25s. High-level B-17s would attack simultaneously, dividing enemy fire and creating maximum confusion. The trap is set. On February 14th, reconnaissance photos of Rabaul Harbor revealed 79 vessels, indicating a major convoy was imminent. 2 days later, ultra-intelligence, the Allies' top-secret ability to read Japanese coded messages, provided the crucial details. A convoy would depart Rabaul on February 28th, bound for La, carrying the 51st Division, along with its precise route and March 5th arrival date. Kenney knew this was his chance. He assembled his commanders, and Brigadier General Ennis Whitehead planned a maximum effort: 219 aircraft, the largest coordinated air strike yet attempted in the Southwest Pacific. The Allied pilots, though apprehensive about the experimental, dangerous low-level attacks, were ready. In Rabaul, the Japanese convoy prepared meticulously. Transports were combat-loaded, and 5,954 soldiers of the 51 SD Division's 115th Regiment boarded 7 ships, plus an 8th carrying aviation fuel. Destroyers carried an additional 958 troops, including critical commanders: Lieutenant General Hatazō Adachi, 18th Army, on the Tokitsuke's, and Lieutenant General Hidemitsu Nakano, 51st Division, with his staff on the Yukike's. This concentration of senior leadership spoke to both Japanese confidence and desperation. Admiral Kimura's operational plan, refined from hard-learned lessons, dictated a longer northern route, using New Britain's mountains for concealment. The final, most dangerous leg would be south through the narrow Vichy Strait, then a dash along the Huon Gulf to La. Japanese air forces at Rabaul promised 100 fighters on rotating patrol, but the distance to the Vichy Strait was at extreme range, limiting their time on station. Many Japanese pilots were exhausted, their aircraft worn. Effective air cover would be sporadic at best. On the evening of February 28, 1943, under tropical darkness, the convoy departed Simpson Harbor. Rear Admiral Kimura, on the Shiryuki S Bridge, watched his charges form 2 columns, destroyers on the flanks and ahead. At midnight, he ordered them to proceed at 7 knots into the darkness. The battle begins. The first day passed without incident, 2 tropical storms providing fortuitous cover. But Kimura knew it couldn't last. As predicted, on March 1st, at 3 p.m., as the convoy rounded Cape Gloucester and turned south, the clouds parted. A B-24 Liberator, piloted by Lieutenant Walter Higgins, spotted them. 8 transports, 8 destroyers. Higgins' contact report electrified 5th Air Force Headquarters. Kenney ordered the attack, but the convoy was spotted earlier than expected, still north of the Vichy Strait, where Japanese fighters from New Britain could provide easier cover. Whitehead made a crucial decision. The first attack would be conventional high-level bombing by B-17s, designed to damage and slow the convoy. The decisive skip bombing attack would wait until tomorrow, when the convoy was funneled into the more restricted waters of the strait. On the morning of March 2nd, the first American attack began. 28 B-17s approached at 6,500 feet, harassed by 30 Japanese fighters. Transport captains watched in horror as bombs rained down. Most missed, but the transport Kyakusei Maru took a direct hit, breaking in half and sinking within minutes. Another transport was damaged. Captain Sato Yasuo, commanding the destroyer Asashio, immediately moved to rescue survivors, cramming nearly 700 soldiers and sailors onto his ship. This heroic act, while admirable, dangerously overloaded the Asashio, compromising her fighting efficiency. As night fell on March 2nd, Admiral Kimura faced a critical choice. The convoy was 12 hours from La, but they had lost 1 transport, and others were damaged. He chose to keep the convoy together, maintaining formation, a decision that would prove fatal. Unbeknownst to him, his decision was intercepted and decoded by Allied intelligence. Kenney and Whitehead knew exactly where the convoy would be at dawn, its speed, its formation. The stage was set. Allied aircrews received final briefings that night, many writing letters home, knowing tomorrow's low-level attack would put them in point-blank range of Japanese guns. Annihilation. Dawn on March 3rd, 1943, broke clear and calm over the Bismarck Sea. Perfect flying weather. The Japanese convoy, now in the confined waters approaching the Huon Gulf, maintained its steady 7-knot advance towards La. Kimura had ordered strict anti-aircraft discipline, conserving ammunition for the battle he knew was coming. At 10 a.m., the first wave appeared. 13 RAF Beaufighters of No. 30 Squadron, led by squadron leader Claude Ridley, came in at wavetop height, their prop wash leaving wakes on the calm sea. Behind them, dark specks against the sky, were the B-25s. On the Horatio S. Bridge, Commander Kabuki had mere seconds to process this unprecedented attack. His anti-aircraft guns could not depress low enough. The Beaufighters were upon him, their 20mm cannons and machine guns unleashing a storm of fire, sweeping across the Horatio S. decks, killing or wounding most gun crews before they could fire. In seconds, the Horatio S. defense was critically degraded. But the Beaufighters were just the opening act. Right behind them came the B-25s, their nose-mounted guns blazing. Major Ed Lana led the B-25 attack, his modified bomber Betty's Dream, approaching the destroyer Shirayuki at 220 miles per hour, 50 feet above the water. At 300 yards, Lana released his bombs and pulled up sharply, clearing the destroyer's mast by feet. Behind him, his bombs skipped once, twice, then slammed into the Shirayuki's hull below the waterline. The effect was catastrophic. The bombs penetrated the thin hull before exploding inside, the blast magnified in the confined spaces. The Shirayuki's stern was blown off, her rear magazine detonating. Within minutes, Admiral Kimura's flagship was sinking. Kimura himself, wounded, was pulled from the water by the destroyer Shikanami. The attack unfolded with deadly, choreographed precision. As low-level Beaufighters and B-25s swept through the convoy, high above them, B-17s released their loads from 7,000 feet, further dividing the anti-aircraft gunners' impossible choice. Lieutenant Charles Howe, flying his B-25 Chatterbox, targeted the transport Tio Maru, loaded with over 1,000 soldiers. The ship tried to turn, her desperate spiral leaving a wake, but it was futile. Howe's bombs skipped perfectly, hitting amidships and near the stern. The Tio Maru seemed to lift from the water, then settled rapidly, capsizing within 5 minutes, trapping hundreds below decks. The destroyer Tokitsuke's, carrying Lieutenant General Adachi, became the target of 3 B-25s. Her captain, Commander Masayoshi Motoora, bravely tried to shield nearby transports, but was overwhelmed. Multiple bomb hits left the Tokitsuke's dead in the water, engine rooms flooded, fires raging. General Adachi was evacuated, but 19 of her crew were killed. Commander Kabuki's Arashio, already damaged, suffered a direct hit that destroyed her steering. Careening out of control, she collided with the transport Nojima Maru. The two ships, locked together, became sitting ducks. Both were abandoned, their crews taking to the water as fires consumed them. In the midst of this carnage, individual acts of heroism and horror played out. On the transport Kimura, soldiers, many new to combat, struggled to launch life rafts as panic spread. Officers, swords drawn, tried to maintain order. They were hundreds of miles from friendly shores, in shark-infested waters, with Allied aircraft methodically destroying any vessel that might rescue them. The Asashio, still crowded with survivors from the previous day's sinking, fought back, Captain Sato Yasuo ordering every weapon to fire. But the weight of numbers told. A B-17, almost forgotten high above, placed a 500-pound bomb directly on the Asashio's forward deck. The explosion, combined with the hundreds of extra personnel, caused rapid flooding. Captain Sato, true to the code of the samurai, chose to go down with his ship. "I'm tired," he reportedly said. "Just let me rest peacefully here." The Asashio sank with enormous loss of life, carrying her crew and many of the soldiers she had rescued. By 10:15 a.m., just 15 minutes after the attack began, the convoy had ceased to exist as an organized force. 7 transports were sinking or sunk. 4 of 8 destroyers were destroyed or fatally damaged. The surviving destroyers, Shikinami *, Yukikase, Uranami, and Asagamo, circled desperately, pulling survivors from the oil-slicked waters. But there were too many men, too few ships. The second wave of Allied aircraft arrived at 2 p.m., finding a scene of utter devastation. The remaining Japanese destroyers, still picking up survivors, were forced to abandon their rescue efforts and defend themselves. The Oigawa Maru, somehow still afloat, was finished off by additional skip bombing attacks. The cost of victory. As darkness fell on March 3rd, the full scale of the disaster became agonizingly clear. Of 6,900 troops embarked at Rabaul, fewer than 1,200 would reach La. The surviving destroyers, working through the night, rescued approximately 2,700 men who were returned to Rabaul. But nearly 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors were dead, killed in action, or drowned in the Bismarck Sea. The carefully assembled reinforcement for New Guinea's defense had been annihilated in a single day. The aftermath was controversial. On March 4th, American PT boats and aircraft patrolled the battle area, attacking anything that floated. The justification was preventing Japanese troops from reaching shore and reinforcing La. But many Allied aircrews were sickened by what they saw as the unnecessary killing of helpless survivors. This moral complexity, the transformation of warfare from a contest between combatants to the wholesale destruction of human beings, would haunt many participants. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the battle was a fundamental shift. Admiral Masatomi Kimura wrote in his diary, "We have lost the ability to move freely within range of enemy land-based aircraft." The convoy system, the backbone of their logistics, was no longer viable. Never again would the Japanese attempt to reinforce garrisons with large convoys in daylight. From now on, only submarines and fast destroyers, operating under cover of darkness, the rat runs, would be used to supply isolated outposts. The tactical success of skip bombing revolutionized Allied anti-shipping operations across the Pacific. Kenney's innovation, born of desperation, proved that properly equipped and trained land-based aircraft could control sea lanes as effectively as any naval force. Within months, skip bombing was employed from the Solomons to the Philippines, making Japanese shipping movements increasingly hazardous and ultimately unsustainable. Major Pappy Gunn, whose family remained imprisoned, continued his innovations, and his B-25 modifications were incorporated directly into production aircraft. The strategic implications rippled through the Japanese command. La, Salamaua, and other New Guinea garrisons were now effectively isolated, left to fight and die where they stood. Lieutenant General Adachi, who survived the Tokitsuke's sinking, reached La with less than 20% of his intended force. His 18th Army, already under strength, faced growing Allied forces without hope of significant reinforcement. His first report was stark. The situation is beyond recovery by normal means. Within 6 months, La fell. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point as significant as Midway or Guadalcanal. It demonstrated conclusively that air power, properly employed, could control sea lines of communication as effectively as any fleet. The age of the battleship was ending. The age of the aircraft had truly begun. The technical lessons drove rapid innovation on both sides, refining skip bombing, developing new weapons. For the Japanese, attempts to develop counters, barrage balloons, smoke screens, specialized anti-aircraft ammunition were too little, too late. The human cost was immense. In Japan, censored reports left families in agonized ignorance. Mrs. Yamada, whose husband was aboard the Tio Maru, received only a brief notice of his glorious death for the emperor. She never learned the terror of his final moments. For Allied code readers, the battle validated their work, but extreme care was taken to attribute the victory to lucky reconnaissance to protect the ultra-secret. The tactical success of skip bombing revolutionized Allied anti-shipping operations across the Pacific. Kenney's innovation, born of desperation, proved that properly equipped and trained land-based aircraft could control sea lanes as effectively as any naval force. Within months, skip bombing was employed from the Solomons to the Philippines, making Japanese shipping movements increasingly hazardous and ultimately unsustainable. Major Pappy Gunn, whose family remained imprisoned, continued his innovations, and his B-25 modifications were incorporated directly into production aircraft. The strategic implications rippled through the Japanese command. La, Salamaua, and other New Guinea garrisons were now effectively isolated, left to fight and die where they stood. Lieutenant General Adachi, who survived the Tokitsuke's sinking, reached La with less than 20% of his intended force. His 18th Army, already under strength, faced growing Allied forces without hope of significant reinforcement. His first report was stark. The situation is beyond recovery by normal means. Within 6 months, La fell. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point as significant as Midway or Guadalcanal. It demonstrated conclusively that air power, properly employed, could control sea lines of communication as effectively as any fleet. The age of the battleship was ending. The age of the aircraft had truly begun. The technical lessons drove rapid innovation on both sides, refining skip bombing, developing new weapons. For the Japanese, attempts to develop counters, barrage balloons, smoke screens, specialized anti-aircraft ammunition were too little, too late. The human cost was immense. In Japan, censored reports left families in agonized ignorance. Mrs. Yamada, whose husband was aboard the Tio Maru, received only a brief notice of his glorious death for the emperor. She never learned the terror of his final moments. For Allied code readers, the battle validated their work, but extreme care was taken to attribute the victory to lucky reconnaissance to protect the ultra-secret. The tactical success of skip bombing revolutionized Allied anti-shipping operations across the Pacific. Kenney's innovation, born of desperation, proved that properly equipped and trained land-based aircraft could control sea lanes as effectively as any naval force. Within months, skip bombing was employed from the Solomons to the Philippines, making Japanese shipping movements increasingly hazardous and ultimately unsustainable. Major Pappy Gunn, whose family remained imprisoned, continued his innovations, and his B-25 modifications were incorporated directly into production aircraft. The strategic implications rippled through the Japanese command. La, Salamaua, and other New Guinea garrisons were now effectively isolated, left to fight and die where they stood. Lieutenant General Adachi, who survived the Tokitsuke's sinking, reached La with less than 20% of his intended force. His 18th Army, already under strength, faced growing Allied forces without hope of significant reinforcement. His first report was stark. The situation is beyond recovery by normal means. Within 6 months, La fell. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point as significant as Midway or Guadalcanal. It demonstrated conclusively that air power, properly employed, could control sea lines of communication as effectively as any fleet. The age of the battleship was ending. The age of the aircraft had truly begun. The technical lessons drove rapid innovation on both sides, refining skip bombing, developing new weapons. For the Japanese, attempts to develop counters, barrage balloons, smoke screens, specialized anti-aircraft ammunition were too little, too late. The human cost was immense. In Japan, censored reports left families in agonized ignorance. Mrs. Yamada, whose husband was aboard the Tio Maru, received only a brief notice of his glorious death for the emperor. She never learned the terror of his final moments. For Allied code readers, the battle validated their work, but extreme care was taken to attribute the victory to lucky reconnaissance to protect the ultra-secret. General MacArthur's triumphant communique exaggerated Japanese losses, but the propaganda value was immense, portraying it as revenge for Pearl Harbor. For the Australians, especially the Beaufighter crews, the victory validated their crucial role. Squadron leader Claude Ridley, awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, reflected, "It wasn't a fight. It was an execution." Japanese inter-service rivalry intensified, with the Army blaming the Navy for inadequate protection and the Navy countering that the Army's insistence on daylight convoys was criminal negligence. This mutual recrimination prevented any serious effort to develop countertactics. An enduring legacy. Today, the Bismarck Sea is peaceful, its waters plied by fishing boats. But beneath them lie the wrecks, silent testimony to one of the Pacific War's most decisive battles. Modern surveys reveal ships sitting upright, their holds still full of trucks, ammunition, and the remains of those who went down with them. The battle's legacy extends beyond military history into the realm of ethics. The attacking of survivors, even if militarily justified, raises uncomfortable questions about the conduct of war. Where is the line between military necessity and humanity? These questions, first confronted at the Bismarck Sea, continue to challenge military leaders and ethicists today. The psychological wounds, invisible but real, are perhaps the battle's most enduring legacy for the veterans. The strategic impact reverberated throughout the remainder of the Pacific War. Japanese inability to reinforce garrisons meant Allied forces could advance more rapidly, bypassing strong points that would have required bloody frontal assaults. Lives were saved, Allied lives, because of the success at Bismarck Sea. In military academies worldwide, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea is studied as a classic example of effects-based operations, achieving strategic goals through precise application of force rather than overwhelming mass. It demonstrates that with proper intelligence, innovative tactics, and coordinated execution, a smaller force can defeat a larger one. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was simultaneously a tactical triumph and a human tragedy. It was a display of innovation and an example of destruction, a necessary military action and a moral challenge. These contradictions characterize all warfare, but they are particularly stark in this battle where success was so complete and the human cost so visible. In those brief moments, the seconds Japanese captains had to react to the skip bombing attack with its 5-second delay fuses, the nature of naval warfare changed forever. The age when surface ships could operate with relative impunity ended. The dominance of air power over sea power was definitively established. The importance of innovation and adaptation in warfare was dramatically demonstrated. The men who fought and died in the Bismarck Sea, Japanese and Allied, soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines, deserve to be remembered not as statistics, but as individuals who found themselves at a crucial moment in history. Their sacrifice, whether voluntary or forced, contributed to the shaping of our modern world. We owe them not just remembrance, but understanding, not just honor, but learning from their experiences to build a better, more peaceful future.